Hey everyone, this is the sample exploratory essay that you read last week, and in this video I want to go over some of the strengths of the essay that many of you noticed, and also a few things that you may not have noticed that didn't come up in the discussions. I encourage you to read the discussion posts if you haven't already, and read my replies. So let's first start with the highlighted stuff. You all noticed that the source material is highlighted. There are 3 sources, and I color-coded each one so that you can find it easily on the works cited list. Please do not highlight your own sources. I did this only for this example so that we could see the sources a little more clearly. And so I want to show you how each source, Cooper, Maltese tie and fan, and Graham, has its own color, and each source can easily be traced to the works cited list. Now, let's talk about the works cited list for a minute. For this essay, I have said that I'm not going to be super picky about your works cited list, at least not the little details. There are a couple specific requirements, though. You do need to have one, and you do need to have every source cited in your paper on that list. So your sources in your in-text citations need to lead us directly to the works cited list. And then you also need to indicate which of these sources came from OneSearch, because using OneSearch is a requirement for this assignment, and every essay needs to have at least one source from OneSearch. Your works cited list is going to tell me which of your sources came from OneSearch. Here, this is a source that came from a library database, EBSCOhost. Okay, and here's another one. So this student happens to have gotten 2 of her sources from OneSearch. If you know how to do this already, that's great. Remember that there's that option that Bill has shown us about how to get the OneSearch to create the citation for you. But for now, just make sure that after you cite the source that you indicate that it came from OneSearch or EBSCOhost or whatever the other database might be. All right, so let's go back and look again at these sources. Whoops. One of the things that you'll notice here is that instead of taking the super easy basic way out of organizing her paper and summarizing one source per paragraph, this student is engaging in some higher level thinking by first determining what her main points are after she's gathered the research, and then using multiple sources to help support those points. So here in one paragraph, she's using all 3 of her sources to help support this point. That's really great. You want to show where you're noticing similarities between sources or differences between your sources, okay? Here again in this paragraph, she's got both sources. Another thing the highlighting is showing us is that, this is a research paper, so a lot of her material comes from research. Whenever she makes a major claim, she supports it by citing a source. Let's take a look at how she uses this source material more technically. Some of you noticed how well she introduces her sources. So here, for example, she has, according to psychology professor Harris Cooper. This is a lot more meaningful to readers than simply saying, Harris Cooper says, because we wouldn't know who that is. When you point out the credentials of your sources, your readers are likely to take that information more seriously, and you are going to look more credible as a researcher. When your sources look good, you look good. So point out the credibility of your source, the credential of the author, or maybe the authority of the publication, like according to this medical journal, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and along those lines, notice how she smoothly leads into every single quotation so that the quotations flow really nicely with her writing. Instead of just plopping them down into the middle of the page, she leads into them with her own words, and then she also follows up. So here, she follows up this quote about controversies by further explaining this controversy and elaborating on the idea. Okay, so this is a skill that many of you had to use in some sort of formula in high school where you had one explanation sentence for every piece of evidence. I'm not so concerned about how many sentences you do this in. The bigger point is that you introduce the quotation or the paraphrase and you follow up and connect it to your point. All right. Let's look at how she's also using paraphrase and summary of these sources. So here, Cooper reasonably hypothesizes, and she's basically summarizing what Cooper says. Same here, this first part is paraphrase. After the quotation, she's got more paraphrase. Here, she's got some paraphrase of Graham. putting the ideas in your own words, paraphrasing like this, is essential, because if you just fill your paper with lots of quotations, they're going to overtake your voice. You need to make sure that your words are the majority of the words in the paper and that you're not over quoting. So if you can say it in your own words just as well, then do that. And remember to cite where you got it from, because you need to give credit to your sources and because you look credible. I think that's all I wanted to say. Oh, here's another example of citation that I talk about in this week's MLA video. Here she quotes Stanford researcher Denise Pope. Notice that Pope isn't on the works cited list because she's not the author. So here she uses quoted in Graham. Okay, this source, Pope, is quoted in Graham, and Graham is on the works cited list. So that's what you do when one of your sources quotes somebody cool, and you want to use that too. All right, let's just spend 1 or 2 minutes talking about the structure of the paper. This is a pretty cool intro. A few of you noticed her effective use of a personal example here. This is a good example of why it can be perfectly okay to say I in a formal paper. It's a solid intro because it gets us hooked into the material. It establishes the debate really clearly, right? She's literally using this word debate to tell us about what is being discussed. I do not like this sentence that much. In this paper, I will. You shouldn't need to announce what you will do. You should just tell us. You should just tell us. So I don't feel like, I don't want you to imitate this. In this paper, I will blah, blah, blah. If you feel like you need to, I guess that's okay. But it seems kind of like formulaic. It seems like a crutch to me. But that's really my only complaint. The structure is really solid. She's using a 5-paragraph structure, right? She's got 3 body paragraphs. Each one has a main point. But notice how she's not using the 6th grade version of it that you learned many years ago. She's not listing the repetitive topic sentences in the intro and in the conclusion. She doesn't need to repeat them. She doesn't have those super elementary transitions like first, second, third. So she's more sophisticated about introducing her main points. Notice how she begins with a clear topic sentence, she supports it, and every sentence kind of wraps up with a return sentence. That's really cool because the readers feel focused. The readers can follow the argument with this kind of return sentence that wraps everything up nicely for us. Notice her use of transitions that are more sophisticated than second or next. You know, she's got this nice little shout back, call back to the previous paragraph and moves into the next paragraph. That's a really good transition. This one too. She'd been talking about lots of studies. She has a transition even with all these studies, blah, 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 and she moves into the point of her next paragraph. Her conclusion wraps things up without being repetitive. Here she meets one of the requirements of this assignment, which is to talk about the potential for future research, either what experts should look into or what she herself, the academic community, we should take a closer look, and so on. All right, works cited page begins on the last page of the essay, and we've already talked about that. Everything is double-spaced and super reader-friendly. She does a lot of work in this paper. This is a good example of a paper that's been carefully revised and proofread to get rid of any distractions so the reader can focus on her great ideas. I think that's all I wanted to say. There are more observations in the discussion thread, as I mentioned. If you have any questions at all, remember just to reach out. And remember, do your own thing in this paper. Please don't try to imitate exactly what she's doing. Do what's best for the content that you have to offer and what will help you meet the assignment requirements as well. Reach out if you have any questions, and I look forward to reading what you come up with in your own essays.